Welcome to our YouTube channel, African Dignity. Today we are going to deal with the problem that South Africa is facing today because of poor governance by the ruling party and its opposition parties. Democracy was a concept coined in the ancient Greek culture, where there was something called the gerousia, where everybody was allowed to rule for a certain period. The same thing that is applying in South Africa today, where we have got general elections from time to time in order to choose the government of our choice. The problem that we have is that South Africa is said to have been liberated by a group of people who called themselves freedom fighters. And those people were exiled, and they came back with one aim only: to repay their lost time by amassing as much revenue from the government as possible. These are the people who unfortunately were not educated. They do not know anything about governance. So theirs is to make sure that they get into government by crook or fix. And once they get into government, they will make sure that they steal as much as possible. Steal for their girlfriends, for their relatives, for their children, and make sure that no one in their families is poor while they are holding public office. This is the problem that we need to face as South Africans, and make sure that we are vigilant and we do not allow it to continue as it is now continuing unabated. We have somebody whom we call the CIC in South Africa, somebody who talks our language, who talks the language of the poor. Everybody likes him, including myself. But the problem that we have is that he has copied the style of Adolf Hitler, the dictator of Germany. His style, his mannerism, his attitude, his oratory is exactly what Hitler did to the poorest of the poor in Germany, and everybody fell for his rhetoric. This is exactly the same thing that is going to happen in South Africa, where people will say the CIC is our savior. Yes, I agree that the CIC will change lives for the better when he comes to power. And we have no choice but to accept that, whether we like it or not, he will come to power, he will run this country to the doldrums. That is the warning that we need to remind ourselves that, yes, the CIC will find a way without any majority, but he will find a way to the helm of South African government. And what we'll do, the moment he is in charge of South Africa, he will change the constitution, or else he will suspend the constitution to say South Africa must be ruled by a military rule, which means what he will do, we will be annexing all these countries like Lesotho, Swaziland, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Angola, all the countries that are under the block of SADC. He will be taking all those countries. Some will come willing because the countries like Malawi are failed states. Countries like Zimbabwe are failed state, including Swaziland is also another failed state where there is no democracy. If you rise, you will be killed, like the recent lawyer that was killed for opposing the government. And so we are in trouble with the CIC. The CIC will run this country, and he will take resources from other African countries to come and change lives for South Africans. So people will be overjoyed to see this guy changing lives in South Africa for every citizen in South Africa at the expense of other Africans from other countries. And he will try to forcefully annex all these other countries to be under a one African rule, and that ruler will be him. That is where the Western world and other European countries will come together and say, let us have regime change, because a united Africa will always be a threat to the West. Imagine an army in Africa that comprises all the 54 countries in Africa, forming one big army. That army will be untouchable. So that will be the reason why the West and other foreign countries, even the Chinese and the Japanese and all other countries will come together and say, we need to stop Africans from undoing what we did in 1884. We'll remember that in 1884, Europeans came together and devised a plan to come and exploit resources in Africa. What they did was they did something which was called the scramble for Africa. They invented borders, that border that we have today. Africa was then one country under different chiefs, and there was relative harmony in Africa then. There were a few skirmishes there, here and there, where people would fight over grazing land, but it was not a serious war, the war that could emanate today, where they will be using nuclear weapons, chemical weapons. Africans would fight using primitive weapons like assegais and machetes and stones. Now, if war breaks in Africa, it will be a disaster. It will be like Armageddon. And that is what we need to stand up and stop before it begins. But if the CIC is allowed to run this country, yes, the lives of South Africans only will be changed, but other Africans will suffer at the expense of making South Africans better than the rest of Africa. That is where the problem will start. So let us all beware of what the CIC can do to this country.